the discussions that took place in Ukraine, I'm sure you must have attended some of those.
Yeah.
In others as well.
Last May, Ukraine, well, you'll know very well that there's a place on the promenade, the high street of Davos. Davos is a town. It's probably smaller than Hermanus, but its appeal is that it's the highest town in Europe, and that it's in the mountains, and there's only one way in through the road, and you've got these high mountains around you, and the Swiss army, there are 5,000 members of the Swiss army, these poor buggers actually camp around or stay around the mountains, so you can't get bad actors coming in. Because if you're the Taliban or one other mischievous organization, it's a great place to go and cause mischief. So it's very secure. You can have, well, in the past, I remember Netanyahu and Arafat were at the same event. So you can imagine, you get people opposites together. Last year, however, there were no Russians there. And Russia House, which is an institution in Davos, every year you have Russia House, was changed into Russia War Crimes House, where the Ukrainians had taken it over. There is no way Russia can win the war in Ukraine. There's no way. The West is completely supportive of Ukraine. This year we've got the mining Indaba coming up next week, we've got the national budget on the 23rd, and then we've got our BizNews conference in the Drakensberg at the end of February. So instead of the usual post-Davos roadshow that I do around the country, this time around it's only in Hermanus where I'm going to share this insight in person anyway. But it is a place that you go to learn. There's a heck of a lot of fake news about it, but I'm going to cover that as well. Okay, context. We're in a thing called the Fourth Industrial Revolution. I'm sure you've heard of the Fourth Industrial Revolution. You've probably forgotten that the first one was steam, up to which point life for human beings was short and brutal. But when steam came along, we started using, as a species, we started using machines to make life better. Indeed, up to the time of steam, it used to take 350 years for the average British family, and Britain's got records in these things, unfortunately not in South Africa, but it used to take 350 years for the average British family to double their standard of living, up until the first industrial revolution, the steam age. Second one is one very close to our hearts in South Africa. It was electricity. That transformed the world. It still has transformed our world, but that's why it's such a basic necessity now of everything else that goes on. That was only the second industrial revolution. The third one was data, information. It was the computer age, where we had technology. We actually started to understand things a lot quicker. When I started as a journalist, we used to have big libraries within the newspapers that I worked, where you had full-time librarians who would cut out paper clippings. And this isn't the Stone Age, this was in the 80s. Today, of course, those librarians have long gone. Libraries are not the kind of places that most people have to go to as we did in the past, and that is because of the information age. So now we're in the fourth industrial revolution. And if you think of the way those revolutions changed things, you must know that there was massive disruption in society, and the fourth industrial revolution is where we're getting a blurring between the digital and the real world. We're getting the emergence of artificial intelligence and the emergence of things like robotics, where robots do things that people did in the past, and monetary policy has dramatically changed. And as a small country, we're on the sharp end and really being hurt by this. But I'll go into that in a little more detail. But that's just the context. Then overlaying all of this in society, we have two types of people. We have, it comes from a French philosopher who visited Polynesia and found a little island in Polynesia where they were typifying what happens in the rest of the world. And we're two types of people, and you can look at people and you will know you fall into one of two categories. You're either a tree people or a boat people. And the way he explained it was on this little island in Polynesia with a big tree. There were those who said, don't touch the tree, We want to sit under the tree. We want to talk amongst each other. We want to be people who are within this environment. In other words, internally focused. We don't really care what's happening on other islands. And then you had the boat people within the same society who wanted to cut the tree down, make canoes so that they can go to other islands to explore. And the world is still full of that. We nowadays call them localists and globalists. Or if you're American, MAGA and woke. MAGA meaning Make America Great Again, and woke is the far side, the progressives, who are way beyond boat people and now in kind of a whole new league. But anyway, overlay that. So you've got two types of people who view the world very differently, and then you've got these massive changes that are happening because of the fourth industrial revolution. If you want to think how big it is, just imagine you were around in the steam age, or imagine you were around when electricity first came to the world. It's probably going to take, certainly the feedback that I'm getting from listening to people, 4 to 5 years for this to settle down. And the 4 to 5 years are likely to be highly, highly turbulent. Now, we saw this already at the World Economic Forum. The first night, PricewaterhouseCoopers releases its annual CEO survey. So what they do is they talk to thousands of chief executives around the world, ask them the same questions, and they've been doing this for 26 years. Last year, the chief executives were the most optimistic they had been in all of those up to that point, 25 years. This year, the chief executives were the most pessimistic that they've been in all that time. Now that's extraordinary. In 1 year, you've gone from the top right down to the bottom. There are many reasons for it, but the reality is we are going through massive, massive turbulence. Now, if you make your living out of trading, you love this. If you're just a normal human being who actually likes to see stability, this is a difficult time. This is a difficult time. And it's going to be difficult for a few more years, and particularly difficult for small countries like South Africa. Before we go into those implications, just to let you know what the World Economic Forum is, it was started in 1971. It is a forum for knowledge sharing. It's a forum for knowledge sharing. It does not set policy for the world. In fact, it's got no damn opinions on anything. All it does is it brings people together to share knowledge with each other. The ultimate boat people, if you like. You get in your boat, you go to the next island, you go and hear from the next island how they are cooking their prawns, and then maybe bring it back and eat prawns differently. That's what the World Economic Forum is. It's nothing more than a forum. It started in 71 as a group, as a bit like the BizNews conference. We're now going into BNC 5. So the first conference, we told our community, come to the Drakensberg, we'll get some interesting speakers. They will share with you, Herman Mashaba, what his intentions were. He hadn't even started a political party then. Nick Hudson, who had a very different view on COVID-19, which now is becoming very mainstream, but at the time he said, hey, this locking down the economy is maybe not such a smart idea, etc., etc. So we were there just to share knowledge. The World Economic Forum is at a different level, and it shares knowledge. But there are many people who don't like you to be sharing the knowledge because the status quo fits them just perfectly, thank you. And they have well-funded others with agendas. Well-funded individuals who will push out into social media. And there was a really good one this year where some guy, and it went viral and it was repeated by some people who should know a lot better, about the CEO of Pfizer, who I saw there, and I wasn't really that fond of him, but anyway, they'd taken a speech that he'd said, altered it to the degree that it says he wants to kill 50% of humanity. And it was very well edited, and this thing went viral until, and I passed, it looked so authentic that I gave it to the WEF people, and they came back to me with a full clip where they'd cut out the important 30 seconds. He was talking about getting 50% of the people on Earth vaccinated rather than killing them. But that was the story that went out on social media. So my urging to you, my plea to you, is please don't keep forwarding and repeating stuff you get on social media, because there are bad actors. There's a whole country run by a guy called Putin, who spends billions of dollars doing exactly what some of us forward on to others. Please, it's my industry. I've been in it for 40 years. I can see this. If you can get people to believe, or just to republish, or retweet, or send on, or send it through WhatsApp, this propaganda and this misinformation, then you've done your job. We call them the useful idiots, the people who repeat the garbage that is created by those with agendas who don't want you to know better. Remember, there's a whole world out there, there's a whole industry out there that is actually trying for you to remain ignorant. So the WEF is now being accused as this body that, I saw Elon Musk tweeted something about the stated policy of the World Economic Forum to depopulate the world. So even he is caught up in. I sent a tweet to his father, who lives here in Somerset West, Errol. And Errol said, this evil World Economic Forum, anyway, that's the way that certain bad actors want you to know. Getting back to the knowledge threatening vested interests and what came out of this World Economic Forum 2023, apart from the confirmation that the turbulence is enormous, there were 4 areas that I'd like to just spend a bit of time on, because these are really relevant. First one is climate change. There's a lot of bad actors playing in the climate change arena, which is not surprising, because if you're making lots of money out of fossil fuels, you don't want people to believe that the climate is changing, or indeed that mankind is helping to change it. The World Economic Forum is exposing this knowledge about climate change. In fact, Al Gore, it was the very first time that he had a platform, was at the World Economic Forum, where he started showing that movie, Inconvenient Truth, about the glaciers that were melting, etc. Now, the reality of climate change, whether you believe man is accelerating it or not accelerating it, is that the climate is changing. And those who are affected are people primarily who live at the coast, that's us, or those who depend on agriculture. It is changing whether man was around or not. There was a thing, if you recall, called the Ice Age. And the world does this. It gets colder and gets hotter and gets colder and gets hotter. And there are implications. What the World Economic Forum is trying to say to us is, let's not make it worse. Let's not accelerate it. You can't stop climate change, but you can stop making it worse than it would have been anyway. But to be aware of it is very important. The second big thing that came out of there was artificial intelligence. Now, about 3 weeks before the World Economic Forum, something emerged called ChatGPT. If you haven't discovered ChatGPT yet, I hope that's not me, I've got the same ringtone. If you haven't discovered ChatGPT yet, you can go on, you can Google it. It's created by an organization called OpenAI. And ChatGPT, ask it anything, any question. The database only goes back to 2021, so don't ask too much about the modern stuff. But it will do for you in seconds what it will take a human being in the knowledge industry, which wasn't supposed to be disrupted by the whole world, the whole world changing, journalists, accountants, librarians. It will take those people days to do the research and put it together. This is artificial intelligence in your hand. It's so popular that in the last 2 days I haven't been able to get onto ChatGPT because it said the resources are full. It was easy beforehand. But suddenly people are seeing how this is changing. If you want to learn how to make better wine, you can say, I come from this part of the world, this is the wine that I make, how can I do it better? It will tell you. It's like this massive, massive supercomputer You remember 2001 A Space Odyssey? The supercomputer's name was HAL, H-A-L. Take the next letters, IBM. It is here. It's reality. But the interesting thing about this on artificial intelligence is that it's available to all of us. Often we say, artificial intelligence is something out there. How does it affect me? How can I use it? I've been in the internet full-time since 1997. And the internet changed around 1997 when an organization called Netscape produced a browser. Like today we use Chrome. Up until that point we didn't have Chrome. We had terrible browsers which you couldn't decipher as a normal human being. As an uneducated human being, unlike the rocket scientists in America. You couldn't decipher what the internet was about without Netscape. When Netscape came, suddenly we could all use the internet. ChatGPT, suddenly we can all access artificial intelligence. Microsoft is investing $10 billion into ChatGPT over the next couple of years. And the chief executive of Microsoft, who was in a group much smaller than this that I attended, said that they are years ahead on artificial intelligence, and ChatGPT is integrated into the Azure platform. I only say that because if you own Microsoft shares, you can probably hold on to them. Crypto. This is something that is highly controversial. So our partners in London, Financial Times of London, had a session, and in that session they were talking about cryptocurrency, and they got one of my heroes, Neil Ferguson, who's a great author. He wrote a book called The Ascent of Money, and the sponsor, and Katie Martin, who's a journalist from Financial Times, who was interviewing them both. And I loved what Ferguson said. He said, if he lived in a high-risk country, i.e. South Africa, he would own plenty Bitcoin, because it's digital gold. It is a defense mechanism against turbulence in the country. It's like nowadays, if you're worried about what might happen in a high-risk country, you would buy some Krugerrands, presumably, but your problem is going to be when you leave the country, because can you take the Krugerrands with you? Whereas with crypto or with Bitcoin, you can do just that. It's a controversial subject. The understanding of Bitcoin that I have, and we've got a really good guy who speaks at our BizNews conference, and you can pick up all the videos after. It'll be early March. They'll all be there. His name is Stafford Marcy. He used to work at Google in the United States as well. He's a Bitcoin maximalist. It's essentially digital gold. But when I hear someone like Neil Ferguson who says, well, we live in America, don't really need to worry too much about Bitcoin as an investment. But if I lived in a high-risk country, I would certainly have a big part of my portfolio in it. That opened my eyes. And finally, South Africa. So Cyril Ramaphosa decided he wouldn't come this year. And he was on the program. He had a lot of sessions that he was going to be involved with. And he had a number of bilaterals with other leaders around the world. He's highly respected internationally, but he is a really nice guy. Those of you who know Cyril will know he is the nicest person to meet. You might not like his leadership style, but as a human being, you'll have to go a long way to find a nicer human being in company. Anyway, he didn't go. And the reason he didn't go was very rational. He stayed home to address the electricity crisis, the second industrial revolution issue that we're busy with. But from South Africa's point of view, what came to me there from the various, and I attended many sessions, had many conversations over the 5 days, is the very, very difficult path that a small country like ours has to walk in this incredibly turbulent international arena. We are not the only people on earth who have an energy crisis. It is global. They haven't screwed up their policy as badly as we have. They haven't got a monopoly that was supplying electricity until very recently, which they completely destroyed. And I say they, meaning the people who were working there in other countries. But they still have an energy crisis. Everywhere you look, there is a crisis. The Germans are importing huge amounts of coal from South Africa. If you go up north and you go along that corridor to Maputo, you'll see trucks and trucks, and to Richards Bay, you'll see lots of trucks on the road. Well, that's because Transnet's broken, but also because the international community desperately wants coal from anywhere, and especially from South Africa, because the Russians are no longer giving them gas. So if you're in Germany, you've closed all your nuclear plants. It's not such a smart move. It seemed like a good idea at the time. Now you are resuscitating your coal plants, and you're even picking up coal fields, as they are trying to do in the UK. This is an issue. Energy is a big, big issue. On the upside in South Africa, we now realize that the government, couldn't run a piss up in a brewery, so let's rather allow the private sector to come to the party as well. So after a year ago, the private sector wasn't allowed to produce electricity. Now please help us, which is a good thing. R.W. Johnson is one of the columnists who writes often for BizNews. And to my mind, he's an Oxford Don. He was an anti-apartheid activist who left the country because he was about to be arrested, went to Oxford, became a professor there, taught many members of the British cabinet, political analyst. He reckons South Africa is going to be the greatest country in the world in a few years' time, because it's going to be the most free enterprise country in the world. Because the government, because it's messed up things so badly, literally just has to pass things on to the private sector. So there's something. You've got to ride it out, and I don't think there are many better places of riding out this turbulence than Hermanus, but you've got to ride it out for a while. But when we come out of it, it's going to be an extraordinary place. Forget, even leaving aside what happens in 2024. South Africa's real issue right now, though, is being a small country. It has problems that others don't have. And just think about this. When I started, I told you about the fourth industrial revolution and how one of the impacts there was monetary policy. So what does that mean? What is monetary policy? It means if you're America and you have COVID-19 and you close down the economy, no problem. You just print more money. And you give the money you print to the businesses that otherwise would have to lay people off. If you're the UK, you do the same thing. If you're Germany or Europe, you do the same thing. If you're South Africa and you print more money to give to the companies to keep people employed, well then your currency falls through the floor. So that option is not available to you. Other developing countries too. So we've had this situation for 2 years where the developed world was able to protect itself against its policies because its populations were largely very old and most at risk to COVID, and was able to protect itself by producing more cash to fund this lockdown, whereas if you happen to live in a developing country, you didn't have that option. You were told to close down, which you did, because it was supposedly the right thing to do in the lockdowns, but at massive, massive cost. And that's caused an even bigger dislocation. We had a session at the Global, we've got a thing they call the Global Media Leaders, off the record with the United Nations Secretary General, it was like so secret, we weren't allowed to take photographs of him to show that he'd been there. But he's very mindful of the issue that I've just shared with you now. And that comes through to climate change. Here you are a developing country, and you're told, no, you've got to cut your carbon emissions, you can't use coal, you can't use gas, because it's going to make the world warmer. But who's telling you this? The rich North. But hang on, didn't the rich North just say to us we had to close down for COVID? And yet they protected themselves by printing more money, and we didn't. These are real issues. Think about it. Level 2 thinking. There's a wonderful investor who says that we look at the world too often as level 1 thinking. What we see, we agree, we accept. And many of us are guilty of that, because stuff comes on social media, so we just forward it because it looks interesting. Meantime, as I tried to say earlier, it's often that we've been manipulated. Level 2 thinking means you look more deeply. So let's take it one final step. What does South Africa do? For all his faults, Ramaphosa is doing the right thing by keeping friends with everyone. Somehow he's managing to stay friends with Russia, China, we've got the BRICS conference, which is going to be hosted in South Africa this year, and with the Western world. How long he can continue, or how long the government can continue to do that, is anyone's guess. But the reality is, if you have a look at the way the developing world has been treated by the developed countries, it's pretty scandalous. But of course, COVID problem is over. Now we're moving on to the next issue, which is climate change, and now listen to us this time as well. So it's not surprising that you see so much antagonism, and you see it at the World Economic Forum. I'm going to close off by just sharing with you something that the Reserve Bank governor reminded me of at this WEF. He, by the way, Lesetja Kganyago, is highly respected internationally, highly respected, and it's not surprising to me that our inflation in South Africa is significantly lower than both the United States and the UK, despite all of the nonsense we've had to go through. So this country's got some real pockets of excellence. Not at Eskom, but elsewhere. When Donald Trump went to the World Economic Forum 4 years ago, I think it was, he arrived there. There was standing room only in the plenary hall, and there was a long line of people trying to get through, to go and see this guy, who everybody reviles today. But I recall very clearly that the governor of the central bank, Mr. Kganyago, and a couple of others in the South African delegation were sitting far away at a bar like this, saying, "No, I'm not going to go and listen to that. Beep, 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 beep." And now it appears as though the world does agree with that assessment. Well, maybe not everybody, because I see he's now back on Facebook. But Facebook says he's no longer a threat. Who knows? We are going through a very interesting time. We are going through a period that when you're exposed to the reality of what is happening in other countries, and you share knowledge with others, you do realize that you live in a country that has got massive disadvantages because of the shifting of the world order. But perhaps R.W. Johnson is right. And perhaps when we come through this, we might just be the country that's sitting in the pound seats for a change, rather than the difficulties that we've had to encounter because of this transition. 15 minutes, yeah, thank you.